that Neoplatonism draws its characteristic ontological orientation from Plato's Parmenides has been the general scholarly opinion since E.R. Dodd's groundbreaking 1928 paper, The Parmenides of Plato and the Origin of the Neoplatonic One. In particular, a certain reading was adopted wherein the Parmenides became the dialectical entryway into a properly Platonic theology. As Proclus said in his Theology of Plato, the Parmenides therefore enkindles in the lovers of Plato the whole and perfect light of the theological science. The Neoplatonic Parmenides is interpreted to suggest a certain path forward for thought, closing off several ontological alternatives. Given Gilles Deleuze's Nietzschean antipathy for the tradition of Platonism, as well as his clearly ontological project in Difference and Repetition, it would be worthwhile, therefore, to situate Deleuze's distinctive thesis on being within the context of the several ontological options said to be dialectically tested within Plato's Parmenides. This will help to deepen and accentuate our understanding of the Deleuzian overturning of Platonism. 1. Ontological principles and metaphysical elaborations. Proclus holds that the Parmenides pertains to the science of the first principles of things. And in his commentary on Plato's Parmenides, he subsequently presents 4 hypothetical kinds of ontological first principles, ostensibly engaged with in the text of the Parmenides. These are 1, pure unity, 2, pure multiplicity, 3, multiplicity participating in unity, and 4, unity containing multiplicity. From these alternatives, the third and fourth clearly collapse into the first and second. Consider multiplicity participating in unity, 3. By hypothesis, this multiple will be distinguished from pure multiplicity by the way of the order conferred through its participation in unity. And yet by this very participation, unity appears as ontologically prior to the multiple unified on its account. So pure unity, 1, maintains a kind of ontic priority to the ordered or participating multiple, 3. And thus, no such participating multiple can be ontologically first. Similarly, a unity containing multiplicity, 4, will seem to be multiple in itself, meaning that the determination of unity will be merely accidental. As such, this composite first must be in itself either the pure multiple, which is a collapse into 2, or else it will be an ordered multiple, which is a collapse back into the participating multiplicity of 3. And as we have seen, participating multiplicity entails the priority of pure unity, 1. This dissolution of both the participating multiplicity of the third alternative and the accidental unity of the fourth leaves us with only 2 possible kinds of first principles. The ontologically first is either a pure unity, 1, or a pure multiplicity, 2. Each of these paired alternatives can itself receive either of 2 different sorts of metaphysical elaborations. The principle can either A, remain alone and in itself, or B, be that from which subsequents proceed. So, implicating the 2 sorts of elaboration and the 2 remaining kinds of principles, we derive 4 distinct metaphysical positions. 1A, pure unity that remains in itself. 1B, pure unity from which subsequents proceed. 2A, pure multiplicity that remains in itself. And 2B, pure multiplicity from which subsequents proceed. According to the predominantly Neoplatonic interpretation, which of these positions is selected in the Parmenides? We will proceed by elimination. 2. Plato's selection amongst metaphysical positions in the Parmenides as interpreted by Neoplatonism. The beginning 2 deductions of the dialogue can be read as an argument against the ontology of pure unity that remains in itself, Parmenidean monism. The first deduction, which is 137c through 142b, presents the dialectical consequences for the simple determination of unity in itself. Unity alone in no way participates being, and no knowledge is possible of it. On the contrary, the unity that is dialectically determined to be chopped up and shared out into the many to the same extent that being is so distributed, as is argued in 142b through 145e. Thus, as Plotinus reads Plato, for instance, the conclusion of these opening deductions is that the Parmenidean one being is inconsistent, that inasmuch as it is merely simple unity, it is beyond being, and insofar as it is a unity that it is a distribution in portions to all beings and equating with the many. Plotinus sees these opening moves as Plato's initial elaboration of the distinctively Neoplatonic understanding of superessential unity in itself, overflowing and emanating into all of being. So, from the first two deductions of the Parmenides, it was argued that Plato shut down the first of our four metaphysical positions, that pure unity, as the ontologically first, should remain alone and in itself. Further, it was argued that the opening moves of the Parmenides suggest a process of generation and distribution grounded in pure unity. Similarly, the final deduction of the dialogue, 165e through 166c, can be read as a Platonic injunction against any ontology of the pure multiple, thus eliminating both the ontological position that holds the pure multiple to remain alone and in itself, as well as the ontological position that proclaims subsequence proceed from the pure multiple. The context of this injunction is Plato's Parmenides considering what must be the case for the others on the condition that unity in no way is. On the basis of what appears to be an axiomatic decision, Plato denies the possibility of any such pure multiple, both for being as well as for thought. For Plato has Parmenides say, the others won't be one, and surely they won't be many either, since oneness would be present in things that are many. For if none of them is one, they are all nothing, so they couldn't be many. Therefore, if oneness isn't present in the others are neither many nor one. Plato seems to be denying at the onset anything like a pure multiple. Pure multiplicity thus does not receive its own concept in the Parmenides. It is no sooner stated as an alternative than it is translated into and mistaken for the derivative and essentially declined ordered or participating multiple. Summarily and by a kind of sleight of hand, the pure multiple slips away from consideration, and our attention is directed to a multiple that presupposes unity. Of the four metaphysical elaborations listed above, the only one that remains after the criticism of Parmenides and the expulsion of the pure multiple is the paradigmatically Neoplatonic position, pure unity as ontological principle, but that does not remain alone, rather being in some sense generative of dependent subsequence. 3. Neoplatonic theologies derived from Plato's decision in the Parmenides. A whole swath of Neoplatonic theologies crop up in the shadow of this distinctive decision in the Parmenides. Plotinus says in the Aeneids that all that is not one is conserved by virtue of the one. They take their degree of unity in their standing near or far toward it, and anything that may spring from the one must be different from it. Differing, it is not one, for then it would be the source. Proclus in the Elements of Theology similarly argues that the one is the undeclined primus, the first cause of all existing things, whence they severally proceed as branches from a root, some near to it and others more remote. Damascius echoes this conclusion in his Problems and Solutions Concerning First Principles, saying, the one is the principle of all things. It is the summit of those things that subsist in terms of hierarchy. The Pseudo-Dionysius says that everything is differentiated and pluralized only insofar as it goes forth from the one. As they, the many, move a little away from it, the one, they are differentiated a little, and as they fall farther, they are farther differentiated. That is, the closer they are to the central point, the more they are at one with it and one with one another. And the more they travel away from it, the more they are separated from each other. Finally, the same movement appears in Eriugeno's Paraphesion, where he states that all things which possess being after God do not possess it simply, but after some manner, which essential limit is the confine of a finite creature. Deleuze tersely summarizes this short history. The first hypothesis of the Parmenides dominates all Neoplatonism. It is worth noting, we might add, that subsequents are only possible on the condition that they fall short of the perfection of the source. They are thus characterized by ontological lack. Further, inasmuch as the source is pure unity, this ontological lack is identically itself the source of disunity, which is to say, diversity amongst declined beings. So, rooted in the very intelligibility of this essentially hierarchical metaphysic that is said to proceed from the Parmenides is an insinuation of the negative into the determination of all declined beings. This Plato himself recognizes and elaborated at length in the Sophists, 255c through 259b. The Eleatic stranger was thus absolutely right to call relative non-being patricide, for the negative is entailed by precisely the ontological procession denied by Parmenides in the position 1a, but essential to its ontological alternative taken within Neoplatonism, 1b. 4. Multiplicity and Deleuzian being. Are we okay on time?
Oh, you're fine.
Excellent. How might Deleuze's ontology fit into this complex constellation of positions? Twice in Difference and Repetition, Deleuze explicitly condemns the alternative between fully positive, unitary being and being differentiated by the negative. I put both quotes in the handout. Within the matrix of ontological positions considered above, Deleuze's refusal to express being in either of these ways concisely removes his notion of being from either metaphysical elaboration of being as pure unity, 1x, whatever one would be. As Deleuze aims to expose being, it is neither pure unity that remains alone in itself, 1a, nor is it pure unity from which subsequents are declined through intagliated non-being, 1b. Only the pure multiple, 2x, remains on the outside of this alternative. Does Deleuze subsequently establish his understanding of being within this outside in terms of pure multiplicity? Let us sketch some of the key elements of Deleuze's ontology to answer this question. Being, Deleuze contests, is to be understood as difference in the sense that it is said of difference. This difference of which being is said is difference taken absolutely, liberated from an entirely relative conception of a difference between entities. Such primary difference is posited to subsist prior to and independently of any form or unity. This ocean of dissemblance, purged of all trace of identity, Deleuze calls the disparate. He characterizes this pure difference by utilizing the distinct notion of intensive quantity. Intensity is, in Deleuze's words, constituted by a difference which itself refers to other differences. Intensive systems relate diverse terms by way of their very difference, where these diverse terms are themselves merely couplings of subtending diverse terms related purely through their differences, etc. Intensity on this conception attests to the ontological priority of difference to identity. It provides a concept for the affirmation of pure difference. As Deleuze says, since it is already difference in itself and comprises inequality as such, intensity affirms difference. It makes difference an object of affirmation. Systems characterized by intensity are thus effects of an autonomous differential structuring. The actual elements populating these systems are so many phenomena that in their flashing forth or epiphany, within quality and extensity, refer back to their intensive sufficient reason. Deleuze importantly distinguishes between an empirical and a transcendental notion of intensity. The empirical notion is deployed within already generated actual domains. Although these empirical systems are thus constituted by the interplay of differences, they are still deployed within an actualized region of being, even if this is merely energy in general. As such, these empirical examples do not directly express unlimited, pure difference. Instead, their intensities are said to be terminated in some ultimate monadic term, not itself constituted by prior differences. On the contrary, transcendental intensity testifies to the bottomless depth of pure difference. It is worth comparing Deleuze's disparate, this transcendental intensity, to Proclus's definition of the pure multiple. Disparity is a state of infinitely doubled difference, which resonates to infinity. Proclus opens his Elements of Theology with an indirect proof that all manifolds participate unity. He begins with the supposition that there is a manifold that in no way participates unity, and defines this pure multiplicity as an infinity of infinities, each of the infinite parts of a manifold being itself infinite in parts, and so on to infinity. Each semblance of unity dissolves into a definite and formless plurality, retreating from all proportionality, equality, and presence. Proclus's definition seems to apply exactly to Deleuze's notion of transcendental intensity, the in itself of absolutized difference. Further, it should be no surprise that it is with the concept of difference that pure multiplicity is to be described. Consider the dyad as it appears in Iamblichus's Theology of Arithmetic. It is the first to have separated itself from the monad, precisely in its function as the agent of differentiation. Yet, for Iamblichus, the dyad is perpetually subordinate to the monad, as matter is to form, because it operates merely relatively within a given initial element, and so presupposes the priority of a unity that is considered absolute. On the contrary, Deleuzian difference in itself isolates the very element of separation by which the dyad is divorced from the monad, and makes this element entirely and utterly absolute. What is thus expressed in this notion of difference in itself is the pure element of unremitting resistance to the dominance of the one, which can in no way be reduced to a manifold participating in unity. As such, when Deleuze argues that difference is behind everything, but behind difference there is nothing, what he is unequivocally advocating is an ontology of the pure multiple. Whereas Plato's Parmenides refused any concept of the pure multiple, and this refusal solely nourished the conviction that if the one is not, nothing is, Deleuze employs the language of intensity to supply an affirmative concept of pure difference. By deploying this absolute notion as the first principle, Deleuze's project can thus be read as an elaboration of the remaining metaphysical alternative 2x, to both Parmenides, 1a, and Neoplatonism, 1b. From here we might ask, does Deleuze's pure multiplicity remain in itself, 2a, or do subsequents proceed from it, 2b? Although space prevents me from presently engaging in this question at any length, I would like to recite a quote from Deleuze that seems to suggest the answer is actually both. He says, "It is therefore proper to say that the system excludes the assignation of an originary and a derived, as though these were a first and second occurrence, because the sole origin is difference, and it causes the difference which it relates to other difference to coexist independently of any resemblance." And then works cited. So.